I think. Yes, excellent. Welcome, everybody. This is the non-legislative subcommittee of the Public Records Advisory Council. The meeting is being recorded, and let's get started. Hopefully we won't need to take the full time today, as it is Friday afternoon. So I got the agenda pulled up, and I'm just going to quickly read through it for those that don't have a copy available. On the agenda today is approving the agenda, motions from council members to add additional agenda items, and then council members to suggest ways to develop guidance on best practices and policies for public records requesters and custodians. And included in that agenda item is commentary from the public and a vote by subcommittee members on actions suggested in this agenda item that requires subcommittee ratification. And then we will conclude with setting our schedule and assignments for next steps regarding the actions we chose. So as you may or may not recall, this subcommittee decided that we're going to work on offering best practices to public records requesters and custodians. And we are attempting to figure out how exactly to do that, including by asking our dogs' opinions, apparently. And so we need to figure
cats.
out. Sorry?
And cats. Don't forget about cats.
Well, of course, absolutely. All animal opinions are welcome. So we know we need to figure out resources and people we want to hear from. And so I put out an ask to you guys about about your thoughts on this. I haven't received anything yet, except Shasta did send me Open Oregon's public records guide this afternoon, which is now posted on the PRAC website. I'm hoping you've come with some ideas today. I have some ideas and suggestions on my own that I'm going to share at this point. But first, I guess we should do some administrative work and approve the agenda before I jump into that. So any corrections, concerns, additions to our agenda that anyone would like to offer at this point?
Yeah, I agreed with the person who submitted testimony that requesters should also be somebody that we talk to as we pursue this issue.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a great idea. And as we work on putting presenters together, I hope you all will keep that in mind and utilize your contacts in the community to make that happen. Okay, so do I have a motion then to approve the agenda barring anything else from anybody?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Agenda is approved. Okay. So let's have a conversation about how we want to move this forward. And I'm going to, since I've got the floor, I will start, and then I'd love to hear what all of you have to think as well. So I don't know about you, I am feeling a bit like I'm burning the candle at both ends right now in my life, professionally and personally. And some of you are also members of the legislative subcommittee and know that that committee has gotten off, to a roaring start, and rightly so. I think legislative change is going to be a big aspect of what the full council is recommending in general to improve upon the public records law. And I don't want to take away from that work while at the same time recognizing that we're going to have a valuable contribution to the council's overall work. But I'm suggesting in some ways we make sure we don't bite off more than we can chew. And I think there's definitely sort of a group consensus that we need to be working on the requester side as well as the public body side in terms of getting advice and guidance out there. But what I'm suggesting today, though, is that we take them one at a time. Don't try to do both at the same time. And, from my perspective as the public records advocate, it's really public bodies that kind of need the most assistance, or however you want to, in whatever terms you want to couch it, because obviously they're the ones with the records that need to be given out upon request, and they're sort of a more coherent body to whom we could address our advice. And so I'm going to recommend we start with that aspect of the work, get out a product or something thereof that we are confident sort of embodies this message that we want the full council to adopt and promote, and then move on to the next thing, which is working on behalf of requesters. And as we've mentioned before, I suspect this subcommittee is going to remain a standing subcommittee that will take on sort of project after project sequentially as they come up and as the needs develop. So I don't think we're limiting ourselves by adopting this approach. I just think it's probably just a little more cost effective in terms of mental energy and everything else going on right now. And so my suggestion, if we are going to go that route, is to work on a model policy. Because in terms of my work and the hundreds of public bodies I've interacted with at the state and local level, one of the things they most commonly ask me after I've helped them with like a one-off problem is, that's great, but is there like a policy that we could look at that'll help us update our own policy so that these questions are sort of answered ahead of time? We don't have to reach out to you. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we have to assist a requester. And I think this is one area where we could get a lot back in terms of what we put into it. And I mean, when I say model policy, we could go as deep and comprehensive as we want. We can have a section on sort of technological solutions, what we would consider to be appropriate staffing for public records requests. However deep and out there we want to get, this could be a very in-depth document that then public bodies can sort of break off pieces from or utilize as they see fit or need, or sort of be like, okay, sections 1 through 10 are great for now, and down the road when it's budget time, we'll talk about sections 15 through 18 with our council or what have you. So it's just like a living document that we could update over time, but has sort of the whole universe of what an ideal public records practice would be, soup to nuts. So that's where I'm at in my thinking and capability, but I really want to hear what you all think about this or other ideas you might have as well.
From my perspective, I'm sorry, Shasta, if you wanted to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
That makes the most sense to me, Todd, frankly. I think obviously we've got a starting place with the DAS policy, and I think there'll be some interesting cut-ups about how we want to try to, the city of Antelope's public records policy may look differently than the state of Oregon's public records policy, but how we'd like to try to work that out, I think, is totally fertile ground for us.
Yeah,
Shasta?
I think it's a great idea to kind of focus on model policy. I've been wanting some kind of model policy for a long time, just kind of looking nationwide. And so, this is an opportunity for us to kind of reclaim in Oregon the legacy that we had in 1973, where we passed this public records law and, became a model for other nations or other states. So, I feel like we could make some groundbreaking work here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. In fact, when I do reviews for public bodies on their policies, I definitely try to keep the spirit as well as the letter of the law in mind. So I add a lot of stuff about reminding staff to communicate with requesters and things like that, but it is still very Oregon specific. And like even when I was helping update the letter for Open Oregon that you use for requesters, there was that conversation we had about, well, is this nationwide or is this just for Oregon? And Oregon being sort of its own unique place, that would generate a different type of letter than one if we were just doing it like for all requesters nationwide. So yeah, I think a very Oregon focused policy that recognizes the difference perhaps among state and local governments, but still says what we think they should all be aspiring towards, as well as a black letter of the law might be a good way to go. Steve.
Yeah, I like your proposal to proceed sequentially. I think that seems manageable. I was just going to say, I think, like, in addition to thinking about policy, which is sort of codifying rules, the rules are in the law, and I think if to the extent like it's helpful to sort of reiterate what the law says in policy, that's great. I also think it's helpful to have like kind of suggestions like shoulds and should nots, like that would be guidance to government employees, and likewise eventually for requesters, like, this is helpful, this can lead to problems, like it's not a rule, it's just like we know from experience this works and that doesn't work, and it may be more accessible in language and and helpful to people.
No, absolutely. When I do my trainings, I always contact the public bodies and say, give me specific examples or issues you're working on so I could tailor my training to your situations. But I also include fairly generic hypotheticals where I'll discuss a section of the law and then walk, participants through it to get their take in like a real life scenario. And the DAS policy actually has a pretty robust FAQ section that I like a lot. So Steve, what about if we did like an FAQ and or like a hypothetical section, something like that, almost like an online learning tool where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I read this section and then I'll walk through some examples.
Yeah, I like that idea for sure.
Okay, so hypos and or FAQs might be a useful way to go then for sure. Okay, I like it. Tony.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, it's so weird to try to do this when we're remote, but yeah, I mean, that kind of ties in, like an online learning tool to me, kind of ties in with the thought I had around how we kind of standardize these approaches across public bodies. And I didn't know if there's some kind of online training tool that every public records provider could be asked to take. Or if that's already a thing or what.
Well, I mean, prior trainings are online. I put up a pretty generic public records 101 at the start of the pandemic. And so maybe, and I just want to acknowledge Molly has joined the meeting. Hello, Molly, welcome. Obviously, you know, we as the PRAC can't obligate any public body utilizing our model policy to do anything, but if we paired the template or model policy that we offered with a pretty standardized online training that we recommend they have staff review, that would be a good idea. And it's either something that I could do as a public records advocate, sort of just put up a general video, you know, recorded training, or as the subcommittee or PRAC, we could put something together and offer it, and everything's digital. So we say, hey, here's the model policy, here's the link to the online training that we consider to complement it. That's not a bad idea, and kind of further extends, I think, the reach and the impact of the policy potentially. Does that get at what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, something that I mean, other people know better than me about how to like create those on the back end, but there's, you know, those online training modules where you know, read about it and then answer questions, and that kind of more interactive thing would be helpful, I think, for providers as well as requesters.
I like that. Hey, Molly, just let you know where we're at. I'd made the suggestion that we kind of take these issues we want to tackle sequentially and start with addressing guidance for public bodies, and then at a next step, work with guidance for requesters. And one avenue I suggested was creating a model policy. I get asked for that a lot, and it seems like it could be a useful area to start working in and make it as robust as we want, with even like technological suggestions, staffing suggestions. Steve wanted something that, you know, was a little more dynamic beyond just restating what the law required. And so we're talking about adding in like hypotheticals and or an FAQ section. Shasta has the idea of pairing it with an online learning module that could be a training or something else. And it could include like questions that anyone using it has to answer to make sure they demonstrate understanding of the law. And so that's more or less where we're at the moment.
Thank you, and I apologize everyone for running late. That all sounds great. I'm a big fan of FAQs. You know, even if it's just a starting place, this sounds like a big project, but something that we can, you know, kind of tackle piece by piece. So
yeah,
maybe do's and don'ts also, or like try to and try not to, or lean toward this, avoid that.
Yeah, and that's where I think sort of the spirit of the law comes in, because the law itself does talk about communications, but it's really, I think, when we're talking about the spirit of the law, that needs to be truly emphasized. So like, is this a point where you would communicate with the requester? And, you know, it probably would be like one of those things where it's like, yes, every time, but nevertheless, it sort of demonstrates the moments when it's best to reach out and find out what's going on. For sure. Oh, Tony, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I agree with everyone about the idea of doing a model policy. I wanted to just make sure I get a little clarity. So, well, first, thank you for, and I acknowledge, and I'm glad to hear that you're just kind of bringing up the existing workload with like the other committee and everything. And you know, the need to just kind of, I've definitely in my past bit more than I can chew, and it's a bummer when you can't follow through. So so I support the idea, and but I wanted to make sure. So, are you still doing like public trainings, or whatever? Yeah, the regular trainings for requesters.
Well, yeah, well, sorry. Yeah, no, my trainings are continuing. I have 4 coming up over the next few weeks. They are all with public bodies. I remain available to work with the requester side as well. I haven't really had the opportunity to sort of like seek out groups and offer it, but I never turn down anyone seeking a training as long as it's appropriate. I just haven't had an ask for a while from anyone other than a public body.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you were just mentioning it as far as the work that we're doing, tackling the policies for the government side, and before kind of looking at policies that would do what for the requesters, or protect the requester, or inform, or what's the other?
Yeah, inform. Yeah, it's kind of what it's kind of the point that you've been keeping centered for us more or less from the start, which is not forgetting the requester community. And so, yeah, I stand ready to offer trainings. Of course, I assist members of the public as they come to me for assistance. But what can we as a subcommittee do to sort of embody or encompass useful advice or guidance to the requester community beyond that? And that could be something as simple as a model letter, sort of along the lines that Open Oregon has pursued in the past for requesters. Like, you want to make a request, fill this out. It's super easy and the way to go. Or what else can we be doing to educate and like protect and inform the requester community? But I'm just saying, start with the public bodies and then take the requests next.
No, I think it's great, and I think it gives time for folks like Scott Forrester, who submitted that testimony and brought up some really good ideas that we can include in the policy, and because I agree with the need for private, or not, for state emails instead of using our private. So that would be a great a suggestion that I think put in that policy. But and it also, I think, once we publish and recommend this and have the FAQs, after a year or 2 or 3, we could definitely track which agencies have adopted and in good faith, and hopefully, everyone has the capacity to make open record policies that are accessible to the community, especially in terms of language and access to information like internet. So
yeah, no, exactly right, and it's something we would definitely have to return to periodically as the law changes, as sort of like cultural expectations change. And hey, if the legislative subcommittee is successful, the law will be changing, so we'll have to update our model policy to reflect those changes and advice as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, this is feeling very productive. This is great. Any other comments or thoughts at this point?
Yeah, I kind of had this similar thoughts along the lines as Tony. Your first question to us was how best to educate requesters and public bodies on the law. And as far as I know, there's a lot of folks doing great work on that. There's Open Oregon, Library Association, your office. And, I would love to see, training modules and all that. But, if we have to prioritize and there are only so many hours in the day, I think a model policy would be great. I did, send out that document, and I think you were able to upload it to the website, which is Open Oregon's kind of quick reference guide. It was updated in 2019. So that's also a really great resource for folks. And we could even, cannibalize that to be an online training module or something. So a lot of that work's kind of been done for us. And then I think we were working on like a standardized request form back when I was at Open Oregon. So yeah, I feel like the education side is pretty solid. And so I would love to see us dive into model policies and what that would look like.
Yeah, and what I like about a model policy is in kind of stating the black letter of the law, but also like the ideal way the law would be executed. Public bodies could use that in conjunction with their own data about requests when they go for funding to say, like, look at the number of requests we have, look how long it's taken us to the extent they're tracking it. And this is where we're at as a result, but this is where the law says we should be based on this like authoritative model policy, right? So, hey, can we get a little funding to sort of, bridge that gap? So I think utilized correctly, this wouldn't just be for frontline staff, but for anyone working in the public record sphere to move their system to where it would better service the public and also themselves, because they wouldn't be beating their heads against the rock every time they had to fulfill a public records request. If they could maybe get some more funding, staffing, and like cultural leadership support. Okay, Steve.
I was just flipping through the guide, Shasta. It's really helpful. And what I like about it is that it hits on some of the same points as the Attorney General's manual, but it's much shorter. So I think that could be a starting point for our FAQs. I had another thought, I guess, in terms of process. I think it might be helpful for kind of fact gathering as we go into this. If we heard from people like you, Todd, but like district attorneys and the Attorney General's office over like basically what are the most common misconceptions that they're encountering? Like when something gets appealed, what are they routinely saying? Public body, you're wrong. Requester is right. And then when we get to the requester phase, we could do the same thing. Like what mistakes do the requesters routinely make that are just like out of hand dismissals or siding with one side or the other. And it maybe like a panel consisting of our colleague Michael Crone, you, and maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 DAs, Multnomah County, Lane County, places that have high volumes of public records appeals would be pretty informative.
Yeah, or maybe even Andy Foltz at DOJ, because he's the actual Public Records Counsel. He works under Michael.
Oh, right.
And he's counsel to the Sunshine Committee. Not that Michael couldn't talk to this too, but Andy like lives it every day constantly. No, I think that's great. No, yeah, when we got to the process point of this, I was going to say, I don't think we should. I mean, I suspect between all of us, if we put our heads together, we could come up with a pretty great model policy. But just like the legislative subcommittee, I do think it's important to hear from actual practitioners on both sides before we put pen to paper, so to speak, to come up with any permanent recommendations. So that I think hearings really do need to be a part of this process for sure. Okay, well, I would, before we move to sort of putting any brackets around this and developing next steps and voting on stuff, I think we're at a point where I'd like to hear public opinion on this, unless anyone thinks differently or has anything else they want to share right now. Okay. Well, hearing nothing from the subcommittee, I would like to invite any members of the public, including public employees who are in this meeting, to offer any testimony related to the issues of creating best practices and guidance for public bodies fulfilling public records requests. If you're in this meeting and can raise your hand digitally, please do so. Otherwise, if you're on the phone, just speak up and we'll make sure you're heard. I'm going to ask everyone to keep their comments to about 2 minutes each, please, to make sure we can hear from everyone and complete the committee's business in a reasonable amount of time.
Scott Forster here.
Hey, Mr. Forster, please go ahead.
Thank you. I might need 3. First off, we need to limit the amount of lawyers needed. So front load the system so that requesters can get their requests basically answered with the least amount of time and expense, and that includes not having to go to court and employ lawyers. Number 2 is as I commented on the letter there, requiring publicly assigned emails. I want to bring to your attention ORS 192.001, which is the beginning of the statute there, and it says policy concerning public records, and I'll not be boring, but just read that it says, the records of the state and its political subdivisions are so interrelated and interdependent that the decision as to what records are retained or destroyed is a matter of statewide public policy. When you have private emails being used by members of various committees and commissions, of which I can identify hundreds within the state at both city, county, local, special district, et cetera levels, is that basically private email server companies such as Google do not retain for the public's benefits those emails of which public business is being done by those various members, often appointed by elected officials. And so the idea that the actual statute starts out saying that it's a statewide policy that records are retained and destroyed we're talking about private emails are not even retained. If there is a request, if I request those, we then depend on the person having the private email account to provide voluntarily, using their own discretion or indiscretion, the emails that they think basically apply to the law. So this is a gaping hole in our democracy, in that we want to have openness and transparency, which is why we have this law created in the 70s in the first place. And the idea that in this day and age, with email and COVID-19 really showing that a lot of stuff is done on the internet, frankly, we need to have a law that catches up with the reality, which is we are not only not complying with the law in terms of using people's voluntary discretion about whether they want to disclose or not, but also that leads to going to court potentially, and then the judge requiring an in-camera review, assuming that he even gets those emails, completely burdensome on the requester, expensive to the system. And then, of course, it doesn't even make sense, because the idea of records is that we also retain, I'll say in closing here, that it says the state, right here, all public records, current or non-current, to ensure the preservation of records for the value of administrative, legal, and research purposes. So this whole idea of when a record becomes an archive document, something for historians and politicians and newspaper people to review about how decisions are arrived at, we're talking about potentially thousands of citizens every year making crucial decisions of advice to elected officials and others, to their own citizens, and that we are not able to even retain for historical purposes the ability to even know what that is. So we're literally losing vast opportunities, and also I don't think complying with the spirit, as I've heard before, of this particular law. And then lastly, suggestion, since you made suggestions, you talk about the FAQ, I suggest that you actually seek and find both good and bad examples of actual public records requests. There's the theory, and then there's the reality. And you could post those on the PRAC website. Also, you could request that local entities actually start to publish public records requests with the properly redacted private information, but so that people within, let's say, cities or counties can look and see, this is an actual request, here is the response, and then here's the outcome. And then as you build that database, we can learn from that, and then you could then attach your FAQs or any comments to what is good or bad about this particular practice. And then lastly, this would identify, let's say, bad actors, both the requesters and also the respondents, the public bodies that may or may not be playing fair with requesters. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have another speaker? Doesn't sound like we do at this time. I just remind everyone on this call or meeting that you're always welcome to submit written testimony. Even after this meeting, it'll be provided to the subcommittee members and made part of the record and posted on the PRAC website. So if you don't have your thoughts together right now, we really do welcome them at any time. Okay, folks, so then, oh, Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond a little to Mr. Forrester's comments, because I think it's an excellent point about private servers, and interestingly enough, this public body had a discussion about our email use recently, it makes me kind of rethink that discussion. But I think it is desirable, certainly, and it seems like you have made some pretty good arguments for changes in statute. But it also makes me think, like, there's nothing to stop us in our recommendations for a model policy for steps that would go beyond statute. And so we certainly could say, like, we strongly advise public bodies to adopt policies of only allowing employees to use public servers. I assume that we encourage people, and public bodies would have the authority to set their own policies for their own employees.
Right, but then remember they have to also adopt systems whose security protocols permit it. So it's not even just like a willingness to do it. Like Secretary of State will more than happily give us all email addresses like they did before, but literally can't because they're not also going to give us state issued devices. So yeah, so I agree. Right. No, but you are 100% correct because our recommendations could include do not adopt systems that don't permit, you know, anyone working on behalf of the government, including volunteers, appointees, et cetera, to not have like government issued email addresses or some other effective means of capturing their work outside of relying on private systems and independent actors. Because if we got a public records request and I didn't happen to hold that information, you know, each of you in good faith would have to go review your private email and let me know, or, you know, or whomever, if those emails existed. And I assume none of you will be duplicitous or try to hide the email. But what if you're not aware of, like, if this is a public record or not, or you make the wrong decision? You would tell me that in good faith, and then these records could potentially remain undisclosed simply because you weren't the best person to look at it, and no one else could look at your system either. So yeah, we can make. So I think any recommendation should include don't adopt systems that don't permit this kind of stuff. But then of course, governments are getting their systems from private actors. Private actors aren't going to necessarily, or private companies aren't going to necessarily adopt their systems to meet our needs if we're one of many clients or a small client or other clients don't care or aren't doing that. So there's like layers of complexity here, but I definitely think we can still make these types of recommendations that government should at least be thinking about if they're not already, and maybe start moving the needle somewhat towards building in full disclosure from the start, or at least engendering more of a conversation about it for sure. Molly, your hand is up.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I just want to reiterate the thing of, you know, the security issue. I checked, I saw the public testimony that was submitted, and I shared it with some folks in our archives division, including Stephanie Clark, who was the former chair of the PRAC, and, you know, said, what do you think about this? And she brought up the same issues with, you know, primarily two-factor authentication, which we can't give state emails unless you can authorize that through, you know, and make sure that it's secure. You know, we know already that we're constantly being attacked and the target of, you know, hackers, foreign and domestic. It is a very real threat. I just want to, you know, emphasize that it's not like just an annoying thing that is more red tape. There's a very clear threat there that makes it necessary. I think, you know, I almost feel like, and maybe it's do's or don'ts, or maybe it's, you know, here's just like the top 10 things to remember. I know, because I've been doing this for so long, that anything I use to communicate public business is subject to public records, but I don't think that that's immediately something that a volunteer on a board knows, or, you know, and maybe that's something that we can help build awareness and around, because even if everyone was to get state issued IDs, that wouldn't mean that your personal ID still isn't subject to public, or your personal email isn't subject to public records request. That part isn't changing. So it feels like we have some work to do to raise awareness around that requirement. And that's something that we can kind of raise the profile of and help, you know, specifically, you know, smaller local governments and volunteer run, you know, boards and commissions understand that if you're talking about your business, your public business, it's a public record.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Molly. Tony.
Yeah, I think thanks, Molly and Steve. I agree that, and wanted just to kind of echo that, you know, that the law, that just, I'm not going to repeat it, but yeah, well, I am going to repeat it, that if you communicate public business on your private stuff, but it's public record. But hearing how much, and I can only imagine having a state, like you said, Molly, ID and having the servers necessary to protect it from all those hacks, you know, volunteer, and that's, you know, sounds, I'm sure that's like thousands of, because I remember monitoring just a regular nonprofit website, and it was pretty scary. So I can't imagine like for government stuff. So I wonder though, like all these volunteers though, you know, different commissions have probably some delicate discussions. Maybe, I mean, I don't know what they are, but if they're relying on Yahoo or Google and you know, well, they probably had really great security, but you know, with hacking and all of that, you kind of want to have. I think one of the key points is the actual location of where the communication files live. And while it's great to encourage the public about not using the state systems, you still got to protect your stuff. And you know, and so my point is like to get. I think a good first step of that is just to you know, study what the cost is to you know, actually provide a system, a computer, and you know, a secure connection down to the levels of public agencies that that don't have, you know, that don't have computers right now or don't have the resources. And so we should figure out it costs 10 billion or 1 million or whatever to outfit computers and systems so that you can set these folks up. And that seems just like the first thing to do. So maybe recommending that on, I don't know if that's a legislative thing or just recommending it through our policy, our model policy. But I would kind of just encourage to see what that cost is to just modernize the entire fleet of public computers and stuff. So anyways, I'll get off.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, Shasta and then Molly.
Yeah, I really appreciated what the commenter said because I do feel like that creating email rules for this council is going to be an excellent case study for how this works in the real world. I mean, what we were just talking about was how it's really useful to have examples. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. Like, you know, we can all kind of be on our own recognizance, but then we're kind of just doing exactly what we tell public bodies not to do. We need to create, you know, a system that works and works every time. So, you know, as we kind of think about our model policy, you know, and you had talked about, you know, who are the people that we need to get advice from, you know, what I see is that our model policy is going to have probably 4 different major like points of contention, like areas of controversy. The first one's going to be technology security, like the intersection between wanting things to be transparent and needing that technology security. So getting people in to talk to us about what is that, what do they really need? Is a device necessary, or is there another way to do 2-factor authentication? You know, kind of like having a discussion around that, I think would be really helpful for kind of the nuts and bolts and the transparency by design and all that awesome stuff that Steve's already been working on for so long. The second one is the intersection of personally identifying information. The third is fees. And the fourth is time delays. And to me, the fees and time delays, those are usually connected to legal review. So finding out why we need legal review on some of these things. So I wonder if it would be helpful to kind of split up our discussion into those 4 topic areas. And if anybody comes up with other ones, I feel like if we kind of take it issue by issue, then the model policy can get done in these digestible chunks.
Well, I just want to jump in before Molly makes her comments, because Shasta, you were reading my mind in terms of I was going to suggest as next steps in process, we figure out from what areas we want to hear from people. And so I definitely like your way of breaking it down. I think we may need to add some more categories, but then I figured we could possibly break it up amongst the 6 of us and start looking for people and sliding them into dates to do presentations so we could feel fully informed before we start actually trying to write any sort of model policy. But I like where you're headed with that. But yeah, I'll leave it there. And Molly, you're up.
Thanks. Shasta, I really like that idea of kind of breaking this down into some smaller parts. I think that makes it quite a lot more manageable. I just wanted to, add on to the conversation about, state-run machines and emails and how we make that all work. I mean, this isn't just a matter of getting everyone a laptop. I mean, this would require staffing. It would require FTE. I mean, I think it would be a good, kind of thought exercise for us to go through what the cost would be. Maybe it could be, but it's not, I think it would be pretty, it would be a lot of money. A lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of people. And that doesn't mean that it's not worth kind of thinking through it. But I mean, if we were to look into the cost, we would have to have some threshold questions about, well, are we just talking about people on state boards and committees? Are we talking about people on local water and soil boards? And, who is the tech support for this? And what do we, how do we account for, equipment lost, stolen, and just to go back to what I said earlier, it still doesn't get away from the fact that if you have state issued email and you use your personal email, that is subject to public records request. So I know there's a retention issue here. I mean, one idea I have, and I'm not a technical expert, is, what if there was a requirement to always CC a state email so that every bit of correspondence is captured somewhere on a server, state server. And, I don't know what the punishment could be, for not doing that. But, what if there was an expectation built in that, every time, any business you do, sure, use your Gmail all day long, but always CC this account and it keeps track of everything in perpetuity, which there will probably be a cost to that too, because data costs money to store data places, but just some kind of things to think through, and not trying to take us down the rabbit hole on this particular area, but because I really do like the idea of splitting this out a little, breaking this down a little bit more in the different concrete areas. That is it.
That's great. Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of giving legal advice. You're always trying to walk that fine line between best practice, but also practicality. What is your client actually capable of versus what they should be doing, and where in between does the liability lie, and how much of that are you willing to take on? And I think our policy should reflect best case scenario, but also has to keep in mind things like cost and technological limitations. And if we are just constantly recommending pie in the sky, is anyone going to listen to us when they say, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't have unlimited money or Microsoft to do what I want. But at the same time, we should be pushing, I think the sort of the envelope of what is acceptable to governments and what they should be spending money on. And I don't think that line is set, and it's really kind of dependent on what we're comfortable with and what we're comfortable with recommending to the full council and what the full council is comfortable recommending. But there's always going to be that tension in our work, right? No matter what we do, for sure. But Adam, go ahead.
You just said about 80% of what I was going to say. But just wanted to totally agree with what Molly said about some of the cost allocations. And I think it's an elegant solution that if we stand up an existing statewide email, that if we're just bouncing emails off it, it's captured somewhere. And to your earlier point about practicality versus perfection, we've kind of touched on it a few different points in this conversation about best practices versus highest and best use. Or what I wouldn't want the model policy to be turned into is a series of aspirational goals that no city, county, or local government would have any hope of accomplishing. And so therefore the model policy is a dead letter from Jump Street. So I think that'll be some of the things we'll have to weigh as we go through this process.
Yeah, maybe I'm too pragmatic in the way I go about things, but I love low-hanging fruit. solve 10% of the problems, and that's 1/10 of the the problems that are gone now that you didn't have before, and then you could actually maybe deal with number 2 and 3 after that, for sure. But I'm sure you guys will keep me looking up as well and not just down as we do this work, for sure. Steve.
Yeah, I love that idea too. It seems like well, I don't know how difficult it is to implement, but we all had state email addresses before the new system was adopted. So, and I don't even know whether you need individualized addresses to do it. Maybe it all goes to a singular repository that the state uses to suck up everybody's emails. But I was going to say, I guess, in terms of how we split things up, I like Shasta's ideas, and I wanted to add to that list. This is not a sticking point like the ones that she pointed to, but I think records management is kind of what we've been talking about, like in terms of model policies for how you handle email, but also what types of systems you use to sort of databases that you purchase, what sort of contracts you enter into, whether they're restrictive with a vendor who is going to keep your records off site and only available through a fee that you pay, that you, the public body, pay them every time. That should be please don't do that. But I don't know. So I just wonder whether that might make another topic on the list.
Yeah, I have this evolving thought in my head. I want to get to that, Tony, just before we get to your comments. I don't forget. So I was thinking along the lines of when we're going to choose like what types of requesters we want and divvy up that work. I was thinking more like I'll take local governments and Tony will take the media and Adam will take state government. But now you guys are kind of going in this other direction of like categories of speakers. But what if we sort of brought in all the usual players that represent the spectrum of the public records world and then just asked them to speak about these categories specifically in addition to their own experience? So that way we sort of get the whole spectrum of players, but make sure they sort of, to the extent that they have experience with it, hit on all these topics we care about. Does that make sense as a possible way to go? Or do you guys feel like you'd rather sort of do these buckets and get people specific to these categories? Tony, I know you had your hand up about something else, but if you want to chime in on that.
Just can you repeat the categories again, Shasta, real quick?
I have. Do you want me to go through it, Shasta?
Well, I've got it right here. So
okay,
intersection of technology security, PII, so personally identifying information, fees, time delays. And then I agree with Steve. I was also thinking like, we're focused on records, but meetings have kind of become records now with meetings like this over the internet. So are meetings now records, and like suggestions on meeting requirements and ways to capture those videos? Some places upload them to YouTube or whatever. Is that what we're, is that the best practice or whatever that we would want to recommend, or is there something better? So those are 5 topics that I have.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I guess in my mind I was, because we've talked in the past, and I don't know if I'm getting the term right, but Steve, you brought it up before, the technology by design, or so like
transparency by design.
Yeah. And so is that I guess that might be included in the technology side, is when you're like Steve said, deciding on contractors or where that data lives is then should decide how you should make that data publicly available in a cost-efficient way that doesn't scare away the everyday public employee from being able to comply with a massive request if it's already kind of laid out easily.
While also keeping the security concerns in mind too.
Yeah, for sure. I think also that I like the idea of the CC. CCing a general state email for volunteers. I always hear in my voice when I'm thinking about technology is what like Mark Landauer says, is that a lot of his the people that he represents, the agencies, don't have even the budget to have a computer, right? And so that I aspire, like maybe I'll be the one dreamer of the group, but like I think open records and open government is what the public uses to trust, right? And so if you can't even pay for like Steve said, like it was already being done. So like I like the idea that we should bring in people that are I would love to hear from the folks that manage the IT systems and just just get a better understanding about why, like, two-factor authentication can be, I don't know. I just feel like I'd like to hear more. Anyways, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Tony. Molly.
So going back to kind of how we structure these conversations, I am of the mind that we would have more kind of deeper and fulfilling conversations if we did this topic by topic. I'm a little nervous that if we, do it kind of stakeholder by stakeholder, we won't get to everything because stakeholders will be fixated on one thing versus others. So, just I'm happy to be, convinced otherwise, but I feel like everyone has their kind of thing that drives them crazy about public records. And unless we are clear that this is a meeting about this issue, and then this issue, and then this issue, we might not really be making progress and kind of having the deep conversations that I think we want to have.
Well, now I feel like you've convinced me, so I'm fine with that as well. I don't know if we need a vote for that. Does that make sense, everyone, more or less? The nod of the head that we should proceed by topic rather than stakeholder and ask them these specific questions. Okay, and doesn't mean we can't like cross-pollinate these presentations with questions about other sections for a particular topic presenter, but I definitely like that. I don't know if we necessarily need a vote as long as everyone's okay with that. So let's do this. Let's spend our time, our remaining time, however long that is, coming to agreement about what those topics are, and then let's divvy up the work and go back to our respective lives and start finding presenters. And then you could communicate with me individually as they come through. Well, I guess, okay, this is what I'm going to suggest. Let's come up with topics. Let's divvy up the topics amongst us to start developing presenters for. Let's get some dates on the calendar for subsequent meetings that we'll try to start slotting people into. And then we could all go about our business getting this done, and you could communicate with me individually as you get your presenters, so I can start building agendas for each of those meetings and slotting in those topics and presenters. Is that good for everybody? Steve.
That sounds good to me. I had a question about the first one that you raised, Shasta, technology security versus transparency. I'm wondering whether that goes, does that go any further beyond this topic that we've been talking about, which is like the security of emails issue? I mean, that seems like the one, for the most part, it doesn't seem like technology security is in conflict with transparency. It's except in that particular instance, but maybe I'm not thinking about this right, and I welcome your thoughts or Adam's.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like as we've gotten more and more, as hackings have come more and more, a lot of the rules that are kind of tamping down on security are coming from the IT security side. So like different ways that we have to, authenticate the email addresses, or different ways that we shield different types of information, different contracts that are popping up between like data, like the data that governments are collecting, and then it goes through Splunk, and then now Splunk owns it or whatever. Like it just seems like there's a lot of those kind of things that are kind of evolving around technology security. And then I also feel like there's some opportunity there, because I think that there's ways to structure that that data and those requirements to actually kind of offer easier solutions for the data that we do want to be public, could like automatically go onto a website or something. And so I do think that there's a lot of crossover there.
Well, should we maybe think more expansively about this to just sort of like technology solutions in general and security being one subset? Because again, I think we've all encountered governments that have said, well, we have this technology, it's off the shelf, and it doesn't really make it easy to produce certain types of records. And so we should think about things like procuring systems with issues regarding searchability, extraction of records, categorization of records so that if it's, automatically a public record, maybe it goes into this bucket. If it's, if it's non-disclosable, this bucket. And so when searches are performed later, it's all about getting the records out more easily and not being able to, not purposely, but all these barriers that are thrown up simply because these systems are not made to easily produce records. So should this be like a broader category with these things as subsets and not just about technological security?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not raising my hand, I'm just speaking. I think these things are kind of inextricably tied together, though. I mean, I don't think we can talk about technology without talking about security, because that's where the rub is on all of this is, how do we keep this secure and still accessible? How to just, in my mind, if everything can be hacked, and so that's why we're needing more security, then, they're not separate issues necessarily.
Right.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
just-
technology security is about hiding things and transparency about opening things. So they are kind of like conflicting.
Yeah, except for how does technological security, like security measures, don't generally impede voluntary disclosure by the public body, right? They're designed to impede theft, right? But that doesn't inherently make it harder for them to produce records in response to a records request, does
But
it?
it can. I actually just encountered this with a county election system. Someone was seeking like a subset of voter information, de-identified, et cetera. But nevertheless, for the county to access that information, they literally had to burn a hard drive. Like they use a third-party vendor, and the security systems were such, and I'm probably going to misstate all this, but essentially going in and pulling this data to then be reviewed for what could be disclosed meant they could no longer use that hard drive. And they had to install a new hard drive. And so a lot of those costs were going to be transferred to the requester as well. And I'm not saying this well, but essentially it was a technological solution that took a hell of a lot longer than it would if this data was just designed to be extracted in a safe way without requiring new hardware, and did increase the cost significantly for the requester and had to go through multiple layers of review within the county to make sure everything was safe. So beyond just emails and stuff, these technology and technological security definitely can be an impediment to disclosure for sure, especially when the system's not designed to automatically respond to public records requests. So yeah, so I'm not suggesting we throw any of this out when asking people to come speak. I'm just suggesting a broader title to this topic, which is technology solutions or technological solutions, and then we could sort of define what that means, but just in terms of a topic, technology systems. Or Steve, you're good at wordsmithing, if you could think of anything else.
I just want to reiterate what Todd said. I mean, it's because I work on public records requests around election records all the time, and it is not as easy as it, clearly we don't want our elections being hacked, but there's just, so we can't give away the king's keys to the kingdom, but we do want, to utmost transparency. And so, there are serious issues here. And thank God we have paper ballots in Oregon. That's the most secure way to vote, but it doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. And I'm sure that there's other areas of government that have similar challenges, probably mostly relating to personally identifiable information. And, how do we do this without giving up social security numbers and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I don't think these goals are mutually exclusive, but I do think that, this is why I think we have to have a whole separate meeting about it and talk about it and just kind of, go through, what are the agreed upon principles we have versus the ones that, where there's question marks.
Yeah, I hear you. Steve.
Yeah, thank you for that. This has all been very clarifying for me. I think because it sounds like what we're talking about is a variety of kind of features, needs of users of technology. Like the public bodies have many features that they need an information system to provide, including security and also including disclosability. And then there are probably other things like protection of PII and fulfillment of business, like running reports and things like that, that are helpful to management of the operation. So I do think that kind of the broader question of like, I think when you say technology, records management, it's all the same thing. I think like what are the best practices for records management and balancing the competing needs of technology users inside the government and requesters outside the government.
Yeah. Go ahead, Molly.
I think one way it just occurred to me after I finally stopped talking, that one way to kind of think about this is that there's public records in the form of how we are communicating with each other and how, decisions get made over email and through memos and through stuff. And then there's public records request in terms of data. And there are two different, very different security concerns for each one. And that might be one way to think about this, because I feel like we started, with this conversation about public records request and security around our conversations, which of course should be public records available. But then there's a other question about data, and some data is subject to public records request and some isn't, and it's all managed in 100 different ways. And so, maybe these are two kind of just different ways of approaching this issue. I know at least for us in elections, it's definitely, if you tell me you want all the emails on this subject, like that's easy. But if you tell me you want, us to tell you all voters who this, that, and the other, well, it's like, it's a whole different can of worms. So.
Okay, well then let's field some ideas on how to just sort of define this category so we could then start thinking about people to speak on it. Does anyone want to sort of encapsulate what we've said into a topic heading or topic with some subsections?
I'll give it a shot. Technology solutions. That would be security, IT contracting, where do you upload videos, all the features that public bodies would need in a technology solution. Or maybe that's records management, I don't know.
Could I put technical debt on the table too?
Sure. So, go ahead.
How do you define that?
We're talking about record. A lot of these systems are sometimes decades old that never contemplated this kind of conversation. And so one of the biggest lifts that I think we've faced over the last 10 years, and even since then, is that we're in this process of modernizing a series of systems that go back to IBM mainframes. That, okay, how do we get them updated? There is a significant cost associated with all of those, and obviously a differing level of desire and prioritization about how that happens. And so it seems like we're overlaying another lens here about, okay, so how much does the public care about system X or the data that is contained within that system, and how do we prioritize transparency in that conversation?
It's maybe tech data and ability to disclose. All right, well, let's leave technology solutions where it is for the moment. I think we're getting to a good place on it. Let's just get the other categories down so we understand sort of the universe we're working in. So next up was PII as its own standalone category. That makes a lot of sense to me. Certainly there's going to probably be some intersection amongst these different categories if we have people speaking directly for PII, I guess it would be, how do they receive, protect, and disclose PII, perhaps? Steve.
Sorry, I just I don't want to delay the discussion, but I have to trot out like this example I always give in terms of why PII matters in transparency, disclosure, and how it rolls into fees and delays and all the other things we're talking about. And that is DHS. Well, back up. usually a big part of the cost of that drives up fees is the need for a public body to review records for the existence of PII in particular, because that it can exist anywhere in the record. DHS, their senior services people, when they've created a database of complaint investigations. And the way that this database is structured is that there's a description of the allegation of abuse, and in that narrative, it describes witness A, victim B, suspected perpetrator C, staff member D. And in that way, they have some way internally of identifying for themselves who these individuals are, but they've stored it in such a way that inherently does not require review for redaction. That is a best practice. And if you can do that, then it saves everybody, it protects PII, and it saves money on lawyers having to read for disclosure.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's ideal. But you see that dovetails with technology solutions, and it dovetails with time delays. So potentially could slot that in anywhere. But yeah, let's keep that in mind for our PII category. Okay, excellent. So yeah, next up is fees. Really, that kind of speaks for itself. And we know that's what the legislative subcommittee is focusing on. But yeah, just the general, I think, experience of whomever's going to be talking about either the fees they've encountered as requesters or the fees they felt necessary to charge as a public body, keeping in mind things like, the public records law says you may recoup up to actual cost, but doesn't require you to charge fees at all or up to actual cost. You could charge less. So maybe we'll want to hear from public bodies about, well, what support or funding is there to limit the amount of fees that are then passed on to requesters and are sort of like accepted as in-house. There's all kinds of ways we can go. Some public bodies, when charging fees for FTEs, don't include things like benefits and sort of like, these ancillary costs of an employee, while others sort of look at the full cost of an employee. And so we could go as deep as we want, and maybe whomever or whichever one of us or more than one of us decides to go with this category, we could flesh it out between us as we build out speakers there. But Shasta, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I think an integral part of that, from my perspective, is the public interest fee waiver. I think there needs to be a lot of fleshing out around what that is and what it should be.
Right, like would public bodies want it better defined in the law or not? Would they like to sort of keep it where it's this essentially judgment call, like sort of this debate that's happened in the last legislative session about defining media? Do we really want to do that? Do we need to differentiate media from general public when deciding if there's a public interest? Is there just de facto recognition that media gets a waiver, whereas a member of the public not necessarily? And then how do you define media? Yeah, I ask a lot of public bodies, have they ever heard of medium.com? And most are like, no, I don't know what that is. But, you could have 10,000 followers on there and you're writing articles and you're more successful than some mainstream journalists. So it's an area worth discussing, I think, for sure. Okay. Anything else to say about fees as a category?
A lot, but we could spare that for the meeting.
Yeah, we could definitely continue to develop these as we set up speakers and ask questions of them. And certainly when we come away from these presentations, I certainly always have the experience of like, oh, I wish I had asked that, because then I realize that's like a blank spot in my mind on these issues. And if nothing else, it'll present additional areas of research for us by the questions raised by the speakers, for sure. Shasta, your hand's still up. Is there anything else you want to say right now?
Nope, sorry.
Okay. No, don't worry about it. I'm surprised I haven't been muted for half of this. Tony?
What about, is there a way to, would this also include like recommending how much of, a percentage of a budget an agency should have dedicated for as a recommendation? So if we're going as far as to like, recommend what we were just talking about, I wonder if it's worth just kind of saying that, a successful agency that has a set up system like what Steve just described, dedicates 20% of its budget to, whatever. And so just to kind of give the fiscal leaders, or the deciders of the budget, just kind of an idea of what's necessary investment to modernize.
Sure. And then that begs the question, though, has this entity been tracking its public records requests to begin with, so it understands how much its costs really are, which is something that.
And then maybe training. So maybe adding training, because I initially was going to ask about, if we should talk about how to advise or how to, recommend folks, if a person that's just like a front desk person that's been placed in charge of requests, versus a police, a public information officer. Those are two different types of trainings, and so I wonder if there's a way to centralize, certain number of hours on public records or something like that should be suitable. So I wonder if that's worth budget and training.
I mean, that could be a question under time delays or records management as well. Well, how much training has staff who handle public records requests been given, so that we can get a sense of how well do they actually understand their obligations, their own policy, past experience, institutional knowledge, things like that, perhaps. Adam?
I would just offer a note of caution, and maybe it's just because I'm who I am or the place that I hold in state government. I think if we get to the point where we're saying, for example, 1% of an agency's budget should be set aside for public records requests or what have you, the way I think a Ways and Means person may hear that is $1 billion should be set aside for public records requests, because if you look at the total funds budget for the state of Oregon itself, we're looking at about $100 billion. And then we run into that same problem that I think public records has faced over the entire life of public records, which is every time somebody comes forward with an idea to make public records easier and it's got a $10 million price tag, then somebody else says, do you want to spend $10 million on public records, or do you want to spend $10 million on child welfare workers, or putting in roads in places, or these other things that you immediately run into competing interest conversations. And so I think it's totally a worthwhile conversation to have. But as we come forward with recommendations, I think it might be worth thinking through what some of those feedback loops might be.
Well, what's the answer? Welfare workers or public records? Come on, Adam.
I think you've seen the state budget. I think you know where they end up.
Steve.
Well, I will say there are probably things that the state spends money on that are not child welfare workers, that cost $10 million. But I think you're right. I mean, like, it seems like it's hard to come up with an arbitrary figure that's right. It seems to make more sense, as Todd is suggesting, if we could at least encourage agencies to be aware, or public bodies in general to be aware of what public records requests are costing them, and to be able to budget for it accordingly. I mean, that broad guidance would be helpful, so that they take steps to try and track it, and and make deliberate efforts to fund it.
But even there, I think we wind into this interesting conversation of eventually somebody's going to ask me, okay, how much did the state government set aside for public records requests this year or this biennium? And if I come back with, well, looking at all the fee waivers we've given to media requests, we've given $90 million worth of fee waivers to media to otherwise address their public records, somebody's going to say, wait, what? We gave for-profit companies $90 million worth of free information. So
I can guarantee you did not give $90 million in fee waivers.
I think we could have a longer conversation when we get into the fee conversation, but I think the number may be even higher. But
well, hey, but that's the point where we say, well, how about instead, state, you invest in this $10 million system that does proactive disclosure. Everything's up. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, and honestly, look, I mean, let me get on my soapbox for a minute. But I think the point of these subcommittees and the point of the PRAC in general is to give governments the encouragement and the courage and the technology and the support and the data to say, yes, it's time we spend money on this. This is a worthwhile investment because it goes so far beyond like Joe Blow in whatever county asking for like his records, but it's really about the core of like government and democracy and transparency. And we're there to like make them feel okay to say that. But I understand along the way, we're going to have these kinds of pitfalls and like conversations and concerns to address. But I think we're the ones that have to be in the room saying, yeah, no, yeah, we are asking you to spend this kind of money because it makes sense and because it saves you money down the road. And of course, everyone that has, you know, their own soapbox to stand on says that about their issue too, but we're the ones that are here to do it about public records. So I don't feel too bad about that. I am worried at any point about getting into specific numbers, but I definitely think at some point we're probably going to have some definitive things to say for sure after important conversations like this. Absolutely. And we can stay on fees all day, but let's maybe move on now to time delays as our next topic, which again maybe speaks for itself, but does anyone want to flesh it out at all? I mean, certainly like the imposition of deadlines in 2017, we want to see how public bodies are doing with that for sure. But Shasta, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know how much the 2017 law helped with some of the time delays. And I don't know if it's time delays that we really need to talk about or just the review process in general. You know, maybe that would be kind of a broader, more actionable topic, which is, you know, that education piece and the training of the custodian and the front desk person who may not know that that's their job, or, you know, the tiny agency that hasn't even assigned a public records custodian, you know, and then the legal part of it. I mean, the legal fees turn into a fees and a time delay issue a lot of the time, negotiating those, and then, you know, trying to figure out, well, when do you really need legal review and when is it a delay tactic? So I don't know. Maybe review process is a better title for that.
Okay, well, what about review process? And then some of the subcategories could be the deadlines, education, and penalties. You know, for the first time ever, Oregon has penalties. It's a little bit of a paper tiger in terms of what actually would happen to a public body, especially compared to like Washington's penalty system. Excuse me, I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just comparing and contrasting. So, you know, so maybe it's worth discussing. Do penalties do anything? Would more penalties do more? Would they do less, et cetera, et cetera? But I would definitely like to have that conversation with whomever we're talking to about it. Okay. Anything else that makes sense for you folks in this section? All right. And then we're on to category 5, records management, which is its own can of worms, right? And sort of, or did we feel like we encompassed that in technology solutions?
I thought we collapsed them down, but I don't know.
No, maybe we did. I guess we did, right? More or less. I mean, one issue that certainly comes up, and I don't really know how much a public body has any control over this, but when using a private company, you know, if they're not effectively negotiating for their data or keeping track of it, a private company is not going to adhere to an individual public body's retention schedule, right? That just happens with text messages and other things of that nature. And I don't know really how much negotiating power an individual public body or even an entire state would have with a technology company when purchasing these systems that will hold their data. But I think that's probably worth exploring if we could come up with some cogent questions around that. So I'll put retention with private companies. Okay, so now we got 4 categories: technology solutions, PII, fees, and review process. Looking at those, I feel like technology solutions and perhaps PII would be particularly large categories and maybe requiring more than one presentation. And maybe if there's 6 of us and 4 categories, we could do 2 people on technology solutions, 2 people on PII, and 1 each on fees and the review process. And then if we break it up that way, we could start trying to find people. Any volunteers for any of these? If you all like what I'm saying. Who has a particular inkling for any of these that would really love to get out there and find speakers?
I'm happy to work on the tech solutions thing. I would recommend that if we're doing 2 people, that the other person be someone not from government, just to kind of balance it out. I just want to be fair, just so that we're, you know, looking at this from all angles. But it's certainly something that I've talked about a little bit with our archives division, and I'm happy to find people that want to speak to it.
That's great. Thanks, Molly.
You can
Okay,
just
well,
say work with me, Molly. I get it.
No, Adam, she can't. This meeting's being recorded. Well, Steve, Shasta, or Tony, would any of you like to pair with Molly on technology solutions then?
He's been doing great work on transparency by design, but I'm also willing to think about some of these technology solutions.
That would be great. I want to volunteer, but I'm also finding like the work on the other subcommittee is taking a good chunk of my time. So
Okay.
if you're able, I would be grateful.
Okay, then I volunteer.
All right, Shasta, thank you. Okay, I'm kind of holding back because I'll take maybe a category that just doesn't get a volunteer. So now's your time to speak up for your preferred category. We have PII, which would be preferable to have 2 people on that, fees and the review process to go.
I think since we'd be talking about public bodies, I'd like to take fees, if it's possible.
Sure. Thank you, Adam.
And I apologize in advance because I'm going to have to run in 5 minutes to go pick up my daughter from daycare.
Appreciate it. I think we're getting to the end. I don't think we're going to really need to vote on anything today either. Tony?
Unless anyone's really interested, I'm happy to take the review process part.
Okay, excellent. Review is Tony, and then I will take PII. Steve, can I slot you in as a second on PII, understanding that you're focusing more on the ledge subcommittee right now?
Yes.
Okay, Todd and Steve. Great. I like this. Do we have another meeting on the books? I don't think we do we? Let's get at least a couple now, or maybe even 3 if possible, going into the spring, so that when we're working on our pieces, we could start giving dates to people as well that we want to have come talk, and that we know if we've already sort of cleared in our own calendars, with the understanding that the legislative session is going to be taking up February, right? And then, so maybe, Tony, go ahead.
What's a good ballpark target to give them for the presentation? Like a half hour or?
Well, kind of depends, right? I mean, if we're going to have like 5 people speaking in one topic, it'll probably be less time. If we have like 3 speakers, they'll get a little more time. So I think it kind of depends, but realistically tell people like 10 to 30 minutes, including questions from the subcommittee.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
so
this
should
would
we just,
be like, so the format of the meeting would be like, we have a presenter, council asks questions, and we'll also have like a public participation part, I think.
yeah, like we'll give them the gist of what we're looking for, so they could just sort of do their own presentation if they prefer, and then we could just do a Q&A afterwards, and then then we'd want to hear from the public sort of what they were informed from these presentations, what they'd like us to take away from them and think about and utilize when building our model policy moving forward. Okay, does anyone feel like we should meet before session starts, or would they be capable of getting speakers in that time, or is that just unrealistic at this point? Molly's saying no, as is Adam. Okay, fair enough, I understand. So then I guess we're talking mid-March for our next meeting, and then moving on from there. Is session literally only February? Do you guys know the dates? I mean, I know we're
March 7th.
Oh, thank you.
Anytime after that.
Okay, let me open my calendar here. Hold on a second. Jeez, come on. Okay, so how's March 23rd for a meeting for everybody? So I'll look at our calendars. And either 1 to 3
I
or
will
2
not,
to.
I
Oh
will
yeah,
not be available.
are Wednesdays bad for you in general?
No, but that's the middle of spring break, and I'll be traveling.
Oh, it is spring break, isn't it? Sorry, I just lost my calendar. Well, what about the week of the 28th then?
For me, that far ahead, it's any week. It's probably okay, as long as.
Yeah, my kid's school is like a 2-week spring break, but we're not, if we're doing anything, it won't be the entire time, so I can be flexible.
I mean, I'm happy to, you know, schedule things out that far in March. I just want to acknowledge that, you know, if at any time I'm needed to do something for the secretary, I have to do that. So
Yeah,
because I don't know her calendar yet, it's a little difficult to see, but I don't see like anything, you know, standing in conflict at this point.
yeah, no, fair enough. And to the extent they respect your calendar when scheduling stuff, maybe if you have this in there, they'll protect that time for you.
Maybe.
Maybe, right? And yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, like for me, for instance, Wednesday the 30th is fairly open at the moment. So how's 2 to 4 on March 30th? Great. And again, this is really just to try to provide some definitiveness to requesters or presenters, rather, of course, will have their own schedules, and we want to be able to be respectful of their time and give them some time certain as well, even if all of us can't be present at every one of these meetings. I think it's better at least try to get this going a little bit. And then because we want to sort of get this done, I wouldn't normally suggest another meeting so soon thereafter, but to sort of get this testimony in, what if we go 2 weeks after that? Which would be, what if my calendar would advance? I could find out. April 13th, right? Yeah, getting a thumbs up from Molly. Is that okay for everyone? And 2 to 4 generally works for me. Does that work for everybody else?
So that April meeting would be for the presenters to present?
Yeah, as would March's. Yeah, because given so many topics and the number of people we're probably going to have presenting, I think it's better to start saying, hey, we're setting this up. Here are the dates we've planned. Let us know like which ones you're available for. And, you know, it'd be better to keep it like one topic per meeting. But if we have a requester who could really only make one of our meetings, not another, and they're off topic, I guess we could just consider breaking stuff up as well.
Okay, but just to clarify, so both March and April are options.
Yeah, right now, sure. Thank you,
Okay,
Adam.
thank you.
Okay. Maybe let's start with those 2 dates for now. Start talking to people about presenting. Everyone communicate with me as that happens. You know, obviously try not to communicate amongst yourselves to avoid serial meetings, and we will get this going.
So we'll do March 30th, April 13th,
2 to 4.
April 27th too, or just leave it there for now?
Let's just leave it at these 2 right now, especially because Adam
Okay.
had to go, and then maybe in March, if not before, via email, we could set up additional meetings.
Okay. And then are we aiming for, like, you know, March 30th is going to be technology solutions, and then, I mean, do we try to narrow it down that far, or just everybody tries to do everything?
You know, that's a very good question, and I don't know I have a definitive answer I feel strongly enough about yet. What if we all just start kind of doing our background homework, and then you guys follow up with me and we start building a schedule from there?
Okay.
Okay, and if anyone gets an epiphany in between that there's a better way to do this, please just let me know as well.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
great. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, well, thank you
Encanto.
everybody so
Encanto's
much.
a really good movie.
So I've heard. I think my kids might be a little bit too old to want to watch it, but I wish they would.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Well, if we're
All
doing
right.
TV
Talk to you guys
recommendations,
later.
Ghosts on BBC. If you need some feel-good,
Oh,
intelligent TV to binge watch over 3 seasons,
Nice.
Ghosts. It's on HBO Max. Don't do the American version.
good tip. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
What's going on with driver?
There we go.